The taiga does not forgive mistakes, but it punishes pride even more severely. Imagine the scene. Winter of 1969. The dense thicket of the Irkutsk region, hundreds of kilometers to the nearest dwelling. The frost freezes the air. Birds fall like stones into the snowdrifts. The primordial silence is suddenly pierced by something else. Not the roar of a beast, but a human cry. The cry of one who was used to being a predator and now has become the victim. A man in a luxurious, out-of-season fur coat and a sable hat falls waist-deep into the snow, gasping for breath. His face is contorted by fear and cold. He desperately looks back to where something terrible is hiding behind a wall of ancient fir trees. This is a colonel, once the master of these lands, whose name was used to frighten both prisoners and officials. He had power, connections in the capital, a personalized pistol in his pocket. But here, in the icy wilderness, all of this loses its meaning. He tries to jump over a fallen log, but his foot slips. A click, a dry metallic sound that makes the blood run colder than the frost. The colonel falls face down in the snow, howling in pain. A steel trap, greased to mask the smell of metal, has sunk its deadly grip into his ankle. This is no ordinary wolf trap. Its teeth are specially blunted so as not to break the bone immediately, but to hold tight. From behind the trees, a silhouette appears silently, like a ghost of the forest. He is wearing an old shabby sheepskin coat, and on his feet are wide hunting skis lined with camoose. In his hands is an old double-barreled shotgun, its stock wrapped in electrical tape. His face is hidden by frosty steam. Only his eyes are visible, full of a cold, leaden weight, without malice or joy. The colonel rasps, his trembling hand reaching for the pistol in his pocket. "Don't be a fool," the hunter's voice sounds quietly but clearly, drowning out the wind. "You know who I am." The hunter approaches, aiming the barrels directly at the bridge of the lying man's nose. "You took my life, citizen chief, and I will take your death from you. You will beg for it, but it will not come soon." To understand how a simple gamekeeper trapped an all-powerful MVD colonel and why there are no innocents in this story, we need to go back to that summer when Stepan's life was split into before and after. Friends, this is a difficult story, a story about what a father is capable of when his most precious possession is taken away, about how a corrupt system breaks fates, and about what happens when an ordinary person's patience is exhausted. Such events are not shown on television and are not printed in official newspapers. If you are ready to learn the truth, no matter how shocking it may be, press the subscribe button right now and give this video a like. This will help us tell the stories that are usually kept silent. And I'm beginning. Irkutsk region, May 1969, the village of Tajny, a place that can only be reached by helicopter, and even then, not always. Around it is an endless green sea of thicket, icy rivers, and numerous colonies. A land of convicts and exiles, which even in the relatively prosperous Brezhnev years, lived by its own unwritten rules. Stepan Andreevich Kornilov was a man whom the locals respected and slightly feared. He was 52 years old, but he looked older. The war had left its marks on him, a scar across his entire back from a mine fragment near Königsberg and a heavy, piercing gaze. Stepan worked as a gamekeeper. The forest was his home, his sanctuary, and his provider. He knew every path, every burrow for 100 versts around. Stepan lived in a solid 5-walled house on the edge of the village. The house always smelled of freshly planed wood, dried herbs, and gun oil. His wife had died of typhus back in the 50s, leaving him with a tiny daughter, Christina. Christina was everything to Stepan, the light in his window, the reason to wake up in the morning. At 18, she had grown into a true beauty, a light brown braid down to her waist, large, naive eyes the color of the summer sky, and a smile that made even the stern loggers fall silent and take off their hats. Stepan cherished her like the apple of his eye, not letting her go to the dances at the club where the local youth drank port wine and walking her to and from school. "Dad, I'm already a grown-up," Christina would laugh when her father once again checked if she was warmly dressed. "To me, you will always be little," Stepan would grumble, stroking her head with his huge, calloused hand. "Times are like this now, daughter. People have become evil, worse than wolves." Trouble came to their home with the smell of lilac and hope for the future. Christina was finishing school. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, of treating people. To do this, she needed to go to Irkutsk to apply to the medical institute. Stepan did not want to let her go. The hunter's heart, accustomed to sensing danger from a verst away, ached and squeezed. But how can you hold back a bird that has spread its wings? Dad, don't you worry so much, she soothed him the evening before her departure, sorting through her modest outfits. I'll just submit my documents, stay with Aunt Valia, and be back in 3 days. I'll bring you some city treats, your favorite halva. Stepan sat at the table, cleaning his old Tuaz BM double-barreled shotgun, and remained silent. Then he put down the ramrod, looked at his daughter, and said, "Be careful, Christina. People in the city are different. If anyone hurts you, don't be silent. Go straight to the police. Or send me a telegram, I'll come. I'll twist anyone into a pretzel." The next morning, he put her on an old Pazik bus that ran once a week to the district center. Christina was in her best blue dress with a white bow in her hair, happy, radiant. She waved to him through the dusty glass until the bus disappeared around a bend, leaving behind a cloud of gray smoke. Stepan stood on the road for a long time until the dust settled. He did not know then that he was seeing his daughter alive for the last time. 3 days passed in a haze. Stepan worked, repaired the roof, checked the traps, but all his thoughts were there, in the city. On the 4th day, Christina was supposed to return. Stepan came to the bus stop an hour before the bus was due to arrive. He stood there smoking cigarette after cigarette, peering down the road. The bus arrived late. Tired women with bags, hungover men, and students poured out of it. Christina was not there. Stepan burst into the bus, scaring the driver. "Where? Where is the girl with the braid in the blue dress? Was she coming back?" The driver, Uncle Misha, whom Stepan had known for 100 years, threw up his hands. "Stepan, what's wrong with you? She wasn't on the bus. I know everyone by sight. It was almost empty coming from the city. Maybe she was delayed? Maybe she missed the bus?" Stepan ran to the post office. There was no telegram. The telephone at the station worked intermittently. He managed to get through to Aunt Valia in Irkutsk only in the evening. "Stepushka," his wife's sister's voice trembled on the phone. "What are you talking about?" "What Christina? She didn't come to my place. I was waiting, I baked pies, but she never showed up. I thought you had changed your minds." At that moment, Stepan's world collapsed. The ground disappeared from under his feet, a ringing in his ears as if a shell had exploded nearby. She hadn't made it. She had disappeared somewhere on the road between the village and the railway station, where she had to transfer. Stepan did not wait for the morning. He started his old Ural motorcycle, tied a can of gasoline to the sidecar, and sped off to the district center. Night. The taiga, a road broken by logging trucks. He noticed nothing. Only one thought beat in his head. Find her. Save her. Kill whoever touched her. The district police station was smoky and stuffy. A young lieutenant with a sleepy face was lazily flipping through a magazine. "Missing?" he asked, yawning. "Citizen Kornilov, why are you panicking? It's a young person's thing. The girl is 18, it's spring, hormones are raging. Your Christina has run off, found herself a city boyfriend. Maybe they went dancing? Maybe to the movies? She'll have her fun and come back. We get a bunch of these reports a week." "She's not like that," Stepan rasped, clenching his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. "She's a homebody. She was going to her aunt's. She didn't make it." "They're all homebodies until their father isn't looking," the lieutenant smirked. "Go home, Dad. Wait for 3 days. If she doesn't show up, then come back and we'll file a report. But right now, we have enough to do without your runaway girls. The collective farm chairman's cedar was stolen. That's an emergency." Stepan looked at him with the gaze one gives an enemy in the crosshairs. The lieutenant choked on his smoke and stopped smiling. "Listen here," Stepan said quietly. "If a single hair on her head is harmed, I'll strip those epaulets off you along with your skin." He walked out of the station, slamming the door so hard that a portrait of Dzerzhinsky fell off the wall. He began to search on his own, methodically as he would search for a wounded animal in the forest. He drove the entire bus route, questioning everyone he met. A saleswoman at a roadside buffet at the Uzlovaya station, a kind-hearted woman, remembered. Yes, there was one. A light brown braid, frightened eyes. She was sitting here drinking tea, waiting for the train to Irkutsk. And then the saleswoman lowered her voice and looked around. Then two men in uniform approached her. Not police, but the guard type. From the zone. Who were they? Stepan gripped the counter. How should I know? We have a zone nearby, IK-14. The officers often come to the station for vodka and snacks. They put her in a car, a black Volga. She seemed to resist, but they said something to her, and she got in. They said they needed to check her documents. A Volga. A black Volga in a remote taiga region is not just a car. It is a symbol of power. Only the highest authorities drove such cars. Party bosses or the head of the colony. Stepan knew who was in charge of IK-14. Colonel Yuri Petrovich Gromov, a man known in the district as the Master. There were various rumors about him. They said that he kept the zone in iron order, that they overfulfilled the plan. They also whispered that the colonel loved a beautiful life and beautiful women, and that the law did not apply to him because he was the law. But Stepan still did not want to believe the worst. The Soviet man was brought up to believe that the police would protect, the party would help. Officers, men of the state, couldn't just kidnap a person in broad daylight. Maybe it was true, a check, maybe a mistake. He went to the zone, a high fence with barbed wire, watchtowers with machine guns, the barking of German shepherds. A gloomy, terrible place, gnawing at the body of the taiga like a cancerous tumor. Of course, they did not let him in at the checkpoint. The colonel is busy. No reception. Get lost, man, before we release the dogs. Stepan returned home, blacker than a thundercloud. He took his rifle, sat on the porch, and began to wait. He did not know what he was waiting for. A sign, a miracle. The miracle did not happen. Something else did. 2 days later, when Stepan came to the station again, a local tramp, a former convict nicknamed Kisley, approached him. "Hey, gamekeeper," he rasped, his breath smelling of alcohol. "Are you looking for a girl? A blonde one?" "I am. Have you seen her?" Stepan grabbed him by the lapels. "I didn't see her, but I heard. I was at the hunting lodge beyond the Black Creek. You know, where the Nachalstvo's hunting lodge is. They were partying there yesterday. Expensive cars, music, women's screams. Not good screams. Gamekeeper, it sounded like they were cutting someone or breaking them." The hunting lodge on the Black Creek, a protected place. Ordinary mortals were forbidden to enter. The elite rested there. Stepan understood everything. The puzzle came together. The bus, the men in uniform, the black Volga, the screams at the hunting lodge. His Christina was not just kidnapped, she was turned into a toy. Stepan released the tramp, thrust a crumpled ruble into his hand. His eyes became empty and terrible. At that moment, Stepan Kornilov, the law-abiding citizen and labor veteran, died and a beast was born. He returned home, took a box from under the floorboards that he had not opened since 1945. There, in an oily rag, lay not just a hunting knife, but trophies and something else he had brought from the front, risking a court-martial. "Well then, Comrade Colonel," Stepan whispered, testing the sharpness of the finished knife with his thumbnail. "You love to hunt? You will have a hunt. Only now you will be the prey. And you, friends, what do you think? Does a father have the right to take the law into his own hands if the law is silent? Or should he have gone to the end, writing to Moscow, to the Kremlin, to Brezhnev? Write your opinion in the comments because what Stepan does next will divide your life into before and after." Stepan did not sleep that night, but he did not pace the hut in hysterics either. Grief, real, heavy male grief, does not scream. It is silent and turns a man to stone. He sat in the light of a kerosene lamp, although electricity had been installed in the village for a year. The electric light seemed too bright, too cheerful, too Soviet to him now. And what he had in mind had nothing to do with Soviet power, with the laws of socialism, or with the moral code of the builder of communism. It was ancient, like the taiga itself, blood for blood. He sorted through his things not like a man preparing for a journey, but like a soldier before being dropped behind enemy lines. An old proven sheepskin coat that did not rustle, light untie boots made of dog fur. The knife was not the one for cutting bread, but the one for skinning, with a wide blade and a blood groove, forged by his blacksmith grandfather. But Stepan's main weapon was not made of iron. The main weapon lay in the shed, You probably think he took an automatic rifle or a machine gun, hidden since the war. No, Stepan only had a double-barreled Tula shotgun and a bandolier with shotgun slugs, bullets for bears that could pierce an elk's shoulder blade from 50 meters. Against guards with Kalashnikovs, this was a joke. But Stepan was not going to fight them openly. He was a gamekeeper, and a gamekeeper knows. The most fearsome beast is not the one that roars the loudest, but the one that knows how to wait and set traps where the victim feels safe. He took coils of steel wire, a box of huge treble hooks for catfish, a small bag of salt and pepper, and a strange tin with some kind of brown ointment. It was bear fat mixed with fur oil. An old hunting secret. Rub it on your clothes and body, and no dog will smell your human scent. To the German shepherds, you would become just a piece of the forest, a fir tree, a stump. Before leaving, he boarded up the windows of the house crosswise, as they did during the war when they evacuated or when there was a deceased person in the house. For Stepan, his former life was dead. He hung a barn lock on the door, stroked the withers of his dog Buran, an old Laika, and with a heavy heart untied him. "Run, Buran, go into the forest. You can't come with me. There's death there." The dog whined, licked his hand, but obeyed. Animals sense trouble better than people. It was 40 kilometers in a straight line to the hunting lodge on the Black Creek, but in the taiga, only birds fly in a straight line. Stepan walked along animal trails, bypassing swamps that still squelched with icy ooze even in May. He walked for a day without sleep or rest. Anger gave him strength, replacing food and water. By the evening of the next day, the forest began to thin out. The air carried the smell of smoke. Not the bitter smoke of a campfire, but the sweet, greasy smoke of shashlik and a banya, the smell of a well-fed life. Stepan approached the hunting lodge from the leeward side. What he saw made his teeth grind so hard that it seemed his enamel was crumbling. In the midst of the wild, impoverished taiga, where people in the villages counted kopecks until payday and mended their clothes, stood a palace, a high fence of solid logs with barbed wire on top. In the center was a 2-story log house made of larch, huge with carved window frames. Nearby were a banya, a garage, and a generator shed that rattled throughout the district. 3 cars stood in the yard, 2 black Volgas and 1 police Uazik, a Bobek. Guards strolled around, not simple conscripts, but warders and convoy guards from the zone. Their faces were well-fed and red, their peacoats unbuttoned, their automatic rifles hanging carelessly on their shoulders, barrels down. They felt like masters here. They knew no one would come here. Not an inspection, not the police, not a random mushroom picker. This was the kingdom of Colonel Gromov. Stepan lay in a snowdrift under a spreading fir tree, blending in with the snow. He watched. An hour, 2. The sun set, the searchlights came on. A company came out of the banya. 5 men, all in sheets, steamed, guffawing. Stepan recognized them all. In a small district, such an elite is known by sight. There was Colonel Gromov himself, heavyset, with a bull neck and small, prickly eyes. Next to him was the second secretary of the district party committee, responsible for ideology, the same one who taught morality to the youth from the rostrum. The third was the director of the Sever gold mining artel, a man who had more money than the entire collective farm combined. Stepan did not know the other 2, apparently guests from Irkutsk or Moscow, important bigwigs for whom this feast was arranged. "Well, Yuri Petrovich," shouted the drunk party secretary, waving a bottle of cognac, "you know how to live, a real communism in a separately taken taiga." "We're trying for the people," Gromov guffawed, and his fat belly shook. "Hey, girls, bring the snacks. Why are you standing there like cows?" Stepan's heart skipped a beat. The doors of the house opened. 3 girls came out onto the porch. They were not in quilted jackets or dresses. In the cold and early spring that chilled to the bone, they were in nothing but translucent nightgowns, barefoot. They carried trays of food. They walked with their heads bowed, shrinking from the cold and fear. One of them was Christina. Stepan almost howled. He wanted to jump up, to scream, to empty both barrels into that fat carcass of the colonel. His fingers themselves fell on the triggers. It was about 70 meters to the porch. For a Jacquin slug, a maximum distance. But he would not have missed. He would have blown off half of Gromov's skull. But Stepan was an experienced hunter. He saw there were 4 guards. They had automatic rifles. If he shot now, he would kill one. Well, maybe he would have time to reload and hit a second one, and then they would riddle him with bullets. And Christina, what would they do to her if he died before her eyes? They would simply kill her as a witness. They would bury her right here, under the banya, and no one would ever know the truth. He looked through the optical sight, a trophy Zeiss attached to the rifle with electrical tape, at his daughter's face. In 5 days, she had aged 10 years, a huge bruise under her eye covered with powder, a split lip, but the most terrible thing was her eyes. They no longer had that light, that sky that he loved so much. They held a void, a glassy, dead emptiness of a person who had been broken, who had been turned into a thing. "Move it, you bitch!" Gromov slapped Christina on the lower back. "Pour for the guests and smile. You love guests, don't you?" Christina flinched as if from an electric shock, but began to pour vodka into faceted glasses. Her hands trembled. The vodka splashed on the table. "You clumsy oaf!" roared the director of the artel and slapped the girl across the face with all his might. Christina fell into the snow. The tray flew onto the steps with a clang. "To the cooler with her," Gromov commanded lazily. "Let her sit in the cellar and think. And you?" He nodded to the guards. "Bring a new one. Over there, in the dormitory. There was a redhead, a new one. We'll discipline this one later." 2 guards took Christina by the arms and dragged her not into the house, but to a shed standing apart. They threw her inside like a sack of potatoes and slammed the heavy door, the bolt clanging. Stepan lowered his rifle. His breath caught. Hot, angry tears flowed down his weathered cheeks and froze on his mustache. He had seen everything. He understood everything. This was not just a dacha. It was a concentration camp, the personal harem of the master of the taiga. Here they kept girls whose mothers were searching for them all over the region. Here they were broken, raped, passed from hand to hand like a bottle of vodka. And when they got tired of them, or they got pregnant, they were simply written off. The taiga is big. The bear will eat everything. Friends, for a second, imagine yourselves in Stepan's place. You see your child, whom you rocked in your arms, being beaten and humiliated by drunk sadists, confident in their impunity. What would you do? Would you rush into an attack with a cry of, "Hurrah, dying a hero," but senselessly? Or would you be able, clenching your teeth to dust, to crawl back into the darkness to prepare a revenge that would make even hell shudder? Write in the comments, attack or cold revenge? This is important because Stepan's choice will determine the fate of all the participants in this drama. Stepan chose the second. He crawled away quietly in a plastune-like manner, without touching a single branch. He understood the main thing. They could not simply be killed. Death by a bullet was too easy a gift for them. They had to go through the same fear, the same horror that those girls had gone through. They had to feel like prey, helpless, pitiful prey, cornered. He moved a kilometer away from the hunting lodge, found an old den, empty since winter, lit a tiny fire in a pit so that the smoke would go into the ground, and began to work. Stepan turned into an engineer of death. He remembered everything his Siberian grandfather had taught him and everything he had seen in reconnaissance during the war. He took out the wire, stretched it between the trees at shin level, an invisible string capable of severing a tendon. He found an anthill that was still sleeping under the snow and dug it up. He made a wolf pit on the path the guards used to check the perimeter. But at the bottom, he did not just put stakes, he smeared them with the contents of the intestines of a raven he had killed the day before. Gangrenous poison, any scratch, and in 3 hours, gangrene, blood poisoning, and a wild fever would begin. But the most terrible thing, he was preparing for the colonel. Stepan knew the habits of the beast. He knew that tomorrow morning, with a hangover, the master would want to hunt. Gromov loved to shoot roe deer, which the gamekeepers specially fed with salt at a feeder not far from the hunting lodge. It was not a hunt, it was a firing squad. "Good," Stepan whispered, twisting a loop of steel cable. "You like a salt lick? I'll give you a salt lick." In the morning, the taiga awoke to the roar of engines. The drunken company decided to get some air. The guards brought out the girls, and no longer in nightgowns, but in some kind of rags. and drove them as beaters. "Come on, you bitches! Make some noise! Drive the beast to us!" shouted the party secretary, firing into the air from a Saiga carbine. This was the last straw. The cup of patience overflowed and cracked. Stepan put on his camouflage suit, checked his knife, and disappeared into the forest. The hunt had begun, but the prey today was not roe deer. The hunt had begun, but it was a strange hunt. Usually the beaters, gamekeepers who know the forest, walk in a line, shouting, knocking on trees with sticks to drive the beast to the positions where the shooters are standing. Here everything was different. The drunken masters of life stood on a clearing, leaning on the hoods of their warm cars. They smoked expensive cigarettes, laughed, and passed flasks of cognac to each other. They were having fun. And in the forest, waist-deep in loose snow, stumbling over fallen trees, ran the girls. They cried, but they ran, because behind them, toying with his automatic rifle, walked Gromov's head of security, a red-haired lout nicknamed Kaban. "Come on, move it!" he shouted. "Whoever lags behind, I'll cut off their ears. Drive the elk to the master." Christina ran on the far left. She had no strength left. Her feet in torn boots had long gone numb from the cold. Her lungs burned with fire. She was no longer crying. She just wanted to fall and sleep, for this nightmare to end. Let her freeze. Let them shoot her. Anything was better than returning to that room at the hunting lodge. She did not notice how a shadow detached itself from the trunk of a huge fir tree. A hand, rough, smelling of pine needles and something familiar, covered her mouth and pulled her into a snowdrift behind a fallen tree with a jerk. Christina struggled, tried to scream, but heard a whisper she would have recognized among 1,000. "Quiet, daughter. Quiet, little one. It's me, Dad." She froze. Her eyes widened. Through her tears, she saw her father's face. So familiar, yet so terrifying now. His eyes were black, like the barrel of his rifle. "Dad," she breathed out with just her lips. "They'll kill you. Go away." "No one will kill me." Stepan quickly untied his scarf and threw it around her neck. "Listen to me. Over there, beyond the ravine, is an old den. I've covered it with fir branches. Crawl there. Take all the girls with you, whoever is nearby. Stay quiet as mice so they don't hear. Don't stick your heads out, understand? And you? And I—" Stepan gave a crooked smile, and this smile was more terrifying than a wolf's snarl. "I'm going to have a talk with the management." Stepan waited until Christina and 2 other girls, whom he had intercepted with signs, had crawled into the ravine. Kaban, the head of security, was about 100 meters to the right. He had seen nothing. He was too confident. He lit a cigarette, hanging his automatic rifle on his shoulder. "Hey, you bitches! Where have you gone quiet?" he roared into the thicket. There was no answer. "You bastards, I'll show you." Kaban stepped into the thicket. The snow crunched under his heavy boots. He walked, breaking branches like a bear. He was angry. The master was waiting for game, and these chickens had scattered. He walked past a juniper bush and did not notice the thin, hair-like steel wire stretched at neck level. Stepan had not made a loop. He had done it simpler. It was a string. Kaban was walking quickly. The blow hit him right in the throat. He did not even understand what had happened. A rasp. The automatic rifle fell into the snow. His hands flew to his neck, trying to find what was preventing him from breathing, but they only found a hot, pulsating stream. He fell to his knees, his eyes bulging. Stepan came out from behind the tree. He was not hiding. He watched as life left the one who had beaten his daughter yesterday. Stepan approached, kicked the automatic rifle aside. Kaban looked at him with horror and a silent question. "For what?" "For the tears," Stepan answered. "For the fear. Sleep well, boy. The taiga will accept everyone." That was the first one. Quiet, clean, without a shot. Stepan dragged the body into the bushes. He took the automatic rifle, but he was not going to shoot from it. Noise was not needed now. Noise would scare away the main prey. On the clearing, they were starting to get nervous. "Where is that idiot with the girls?" grumbled the director of the Sever Artel, a fat man in a fox fur hat. "I'm already cold." "Yura, what kind of staff do you have? Can't drink, can't hunt. We'll figure it out." Colonel Gromov frowned. Seryoga, Vitya, he shouted to the two remaining guards. Go and see where they've gone. Maybe they ran into wolves? The guards, cocking their bolts, reluctantly went into the forest. Stepan was waiting for this. Divide and conquer, the ancient principle of war. One went right, the other left. Stepan chose the one who went left, closer to the swamp. There, Stepan had a surprise prepared for the particularly greedy. The guard, a young guy, clearly from the city, walked cautiously. He saw tracks in the snow. Strange tracks, as if someone had dragged something heavy. Kaban, he called out uncertainly. Are you here? Something glittered ahead on a clearing. The guard approached. On a stump in the middle of the clearing lay a gold watch, massive, expensive, on a bracelet. The director of the Artel's watch, which he had lost in the banya yesterday while drunk, and which Stepan had found. Greed is a poor advisor. The guard looked around. No one. What a find, he thought. The master won't remember, and I'll buy a Zhiguli in the city. He stepped toward the stump. The snow under his feet gave way without a sound, softly like a featherbed. It was a wolf pit, deep, 2.5 meters. Stepan had dug it during the night, camouflaging it with branches and snow. But there were no stakes at the bottom. Stepan decided that death was too simple. At the bottom was icy water. The pit was dug on a spring that did not freeze even in winter. The guard tumbled down into the icy sludge. He tried to scream, but the icy shock took his breath away. The walls of the pit were slippery, clayey. It was impossible to get out in a heavy pea coat. Stepan approached the edge of the pit, looked down. The guy was flailing, turning blue before his eyes. Cold? Stepan asked sympathetically. And how was it for the girls in nightgowns in the cold? Uncle, help! The guy's teeth chattered. I didn't touch them. I was just guarding. Guarding, Stepan nodded. So sit there now. Guard the water. He turned and left. In 10 minutes, hypothermia would do its job. The man would simply fall asleep forever. 3 remained on the clearing and 1 guard in the forest. Stepan moved silently like a lynx. He knew that panic would start now. They would hear the silence. Silence in the forest is more terrifying than any scream. When the birds fall silent, when people disappear, fear awakens in the darkest corners of the soul. On the clearing, they were indeed getting nervous. Half an hour had passed. No Kaban, no Vitya, no girls. What the hell is going on? The party secretary shrieked. Yura, I don't like this. Let's get out of here. Where? Gromov snapped. I have people there. Seryoga, he shouted into the radio. Back then, the police had portable viola radios. Seryoga, come in. The radio hissed with static, then a voice broke through the crackle. A strange voice. Seryoga won't answer, Citizen Chief. Gromov froze. Who is this? He rasped, gripping the saiga. Who are you? I am the court, the voice answered. Your personal judgment day, Yura. You love to hunt. Now you are being hunted. Run. Gromov dropped the radio. His face turned red in patches. To the car, he shouted. Let's go. He, the secretary, and the director of the Artel rushed to the cars, but a third surprise awaited them there. When they ran up to the Volgas and the Uazik, they saw that all the tires were flat. But not just flat. Dozens of hunting knives were stuck in the tires, driven in up to the hilt. And on the hood of the colonel's Volga lay the head of a boar. Not a man, a real wild boar that Stepan had killed a week ago. But in the beast's mouth was the ID of the head of security, the same red-haired Kaban. It was a sign, a primal animal sign. You are meat here. We're surrounded, howled the director of the Artel, a man who was purely civilian and cowardly. There's a gang of them, a whole squad. Shut up! Gromov hit him with the butt of his rifle. What squad? It's a local. The gamekeeper Kornilov. Definitely that girl's dad. Gromov was no fool. He quickly put 2 and 2 together. He's alone. He has a double-barreled shotgun, and we have carbines and pistols. We'll shoot him like a rabbit. I'm not going to shoot, the secretary whined. I'm a party worker. They have no right. I'll go on foot. He rushed to run down the road towards the village. Stop, you fool, Gromov shouted. The secretary ran about 50 meters. The road was cleared by a grader. It was easy to run. He thought he was saved. But Stepan had foreseen this too. He knew the psychology of rats. Rats are the first to flee a sinking ship. At a bend where the road went downhill, Stepan had previously sawn through a huge dry pine tree. It was holding on by a thread, by a single splinter. When the secretary came alongside the tree, Stepan, who was sitting in ambush on a hill, simply pulled a rope. A crack. The huge trunk crashed across the road right in front of the running official. A branch as thick as an arm whipped him across the face, knocking him off his feet. The secretary fell, screaming in pain. He was alive, but the path was cut off, and from the forest, Stepan came out right at him. The official crawled, losing his muskrat fur hat in the snow. "Don't kill me," he wailed. "I'll give you everything. An apartment in Moscow, an order." I had nothing to do with it. It was all Gromov. I just watched. Stepan stepped on his chest with his foot, pressing him into the snow with a heavy untie-boot. "Watched?" he asked. "So you're a spectator. You like to watch others being tortured? Well then, watch." Stepan did not kill him. Not yet. He took a coil of wire from his pocket. "Get up. You're coming with me. You'll be my bait. You know they use live bait for bears, right?" He tied the secretary's hands behind his back and gagged him with his own fur hat. "If you scream, I'll cut your throat," Stepan promised. "But if you behave, maybe you'll live to see a people's court." Now two were left on the road, Colonel Gromov and the director of the artel, and the last guard who had already run out of the forest, pale as a sheet, and with trembling hands was reporting, "Comrade Colonel, Vitya is in the pit, dead." Gromov looked at the dark wall of the taiga. The sun was setting. It would soon be dark, and at night in the forest against a gamekeeper, they had no chance. Zero. Gromov understood. They were being herded back to the hunting lodge. Into the house, into a trap. "To the house," he commanded. "Barricade yourselves. We have ammunition, food, vodka. We'll hold out until morning, and in the morning we'll call a helicopter." They ran to the house, looking back, shooting into the void. They thought that the larch walls would save them. Fools. They had driven themselves into a cage, and Stepan had the key. "Friends, tell me honestly, do you feel sorry for these people? The secretary who cried and offered an order? The guard who drowned in the icy sludge? After all, they are also someone's sons, fathers. Or does the evil they committed deprive them of the right to sympathy? Right, pity, or serves them right? This is the eternal question. Where does justice end and cruelty begin? Stepan saw the heavy oak door of the hunting lodge slam shut. The bolts clicked. The lights in the windows went out. They were afraid of a sniper. He sat on the edge of the forest, stroking the cold metal of his rifle and looking at the house. "They've crawled into their burrow, the rats," he whispered. "It's warm and cozy for you in there. Never mind, I'll light the stove for you now, black style." In Stepan's pocket was not only wire, there was a signal flare and something else he had found in Gromov's shed. A can of gasoline for the generator, but he was not going to burn the house. That would be too easy. They would suffocate from the smoke and die an easy death. No. Stepan wanted to look Gromov in the eye. He began to walk around the house clutching an axe in his hand. The most terrible night in the history of this forest was about to begin. The night of the long knives. Have you ever heard the sound of fear? Real animal fear in a confined space. It's not screams. It's a heavy, wheezing breath, the creak of floorboards, the clinking of glass when a person tries to take a sip, but their hands won't obey. And the smell. The elite log house at the hunting lodge no longer smelled of wood and shashlik. It smelled of expensive cologne, sour sweat, and hopelessness. 3 men sat in the living room in the light of an electric bulb that flickered constantly. The generator in the shed was running on its last legs, as if sensing the mood of its owners. Colonel Gromov sat in an armchair, a Dragunov self-loading carbine on his lap. A rare weapon, the dream of any hunter. A gift from the minister, a 9mm bullet that could take down an elephant. But now this blued barrel gave no confidence. Gromov was drinking cognac straight from the bottle, and the dark liquid ran down his chin. "Yura, we have to do something," whined the director of the artel, huddled in the corner of the sofa. "I have a heart condition. I have angina. I can't sit here. Let's make a deal. Let's offer him money. Gold. I have 2 kilograms of unregistered sand in my safe. Who are you going to offer it to? Gromov spat on the lynx-skin rug. He doesn't need gold. He needs my head. And yours, by the way. You beat that girl yesterday, you did. So now pray to your gods, you merchant. The third guard, Seryoga, stood by the window, pushing the thick curtain aside slightly with the barrel of his automatic rifle. He was as pale as chalk. He had seen what had happened to Kaban, and he knew, outside the window in the darkness, death was walking. Quiet, the guard suddenly hissed. Do you hear that? In the ensuing silence, they heard a sound, a dull, rhythmic knocking. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was not coming from the door or the windows. It was coming from above, from the roof. Someone heavy was walking right above their heads. He's on the roof, the director shrieked. Shoot, Seryoga! Shoot at the ceiling! Hold your fire, Gromov barked. Save your ammunition. The roof is double with insulation. The bullet will get stuck. The footsteps above fell silent, and a minute later the light went out. The bulb under the ceiling flared up one last time and died. The generator fell silent, as if a huge hand had cut the house's artery. Darkness fell instantly, thick. You could cut it with a knife. Matches! Who has matches? Gromov shouted. A scuffle was heard. A flick. The flame of a lighter snatched the distorted faces from the gloom. Look for candles, you idiots. They were in the buffet. While they fumbled on the shelves, lighting candles with trembling hands, the house began to change. It became cold but not frosty. Smoke began to pour from the fireplace, which had been crackling merrily all evening. Thick, acrid, black smoke. There's no draft, the guard coughed. He's blocked the chimney. It was a classic of partisan warfare. Stepan, standing on the roof, had simply covered the chimney with a piece of tarpaulin and weighed it down with a heavy stone. The smoke, finding no way out, went back into the room. In 5 minutes, it became impossible to breathe. Their eyes watered, their throats were raw from coughing. Open the windows, the director rasped, sliding to the floor. We'll suffocate. Don't you dare, Gromov kicked him with his boot. If you open a window, you'll get a bullet. That's what he's waiting for. He's smoking us out like a fox from its den. Endure it. Wet some rags. Breathe through them. But it was impossible to endure. Carbon monoxide is a silent but swift killer. Their heads began to spin. Hammers pounded in their temples. The guard Seryoga was the first to break. The instinct for self-preservation proved stronger than the fear of a bullet. To hell with you, he shouted, throwing down his automatic rifle and rushing to the front door. I want to live. I'll surrender. I'll say you forced me. He threw back the heavy bolt, flung the door wide open, and tumbled out onto the porch, greedily gulping the frosty air. Don't shoot, man, he shouted into the darkness, raising his hands. I'm unarmed. I'm coming out. Gromov raised his carbine, aiming at the back of his own guard. His finger rested on the trigger. The colonel hated traitors more than enemies. The shot boomed in the confined space like a cannon blast. The guard on the porch jerked, clutched his shoulder blade, and fell face down in the snow. A dog's death for a dog, Gromov roared. Well, who else wants to go out? The director of the artel huddled under the table, covering his head with his hands. He was howling with terror. The door remained open. Cold air rushed into the house, mixing with the smoke. But along with the air, something else appeared on the threshold. Something heavy and large flew in from the darkness outside through the open doorway. It fell to the floor, rolled, and came to a stop at Gromov's feet. It was a man, bound hand and foot, with a gag in his mouth. The second secretary of the district party committee. He was alive, but his eyes, bulging with terror, rolled like a madman's. On his chest, pinned to his expensive sheepskin coat with a hunting knife, was a white note, a sheet torn from a school notebook. Gromov, keeping his carbine at the ready, bent down, read it aloud, and his voice trembled for the first time that evening. 1 for 1. Give me the director, and I'll give you until dawn. If you don't, I'll come in myself. It was an ultimatum. Stepan was bargaining. He wanted to separate them. He wanted to judge them one by one. Gromov slowly turned his head toward the table under which the director of the artel was sitting. Did you hear that, Borya? The colonel asked quietly. He wants you. Yura, don't, the director shrieked, trying to crawl away. We're friends. We've known each other for so many years. I have children. That girl had a father, too, Gromov smirked. Fear suddenly vanished, replaced by cold calculation. If I give up the fat man, the gamekeeper will deal with him. That will buy time. An hour? 2? I can try to break through to the snowmobile in the garage. Sorry, Borya, the bullets won't carry 2. Gromov grabbed the director by the collar and with inhuman strength dragged him to the door. He kicked and struggled, clawed at the carpet, squealed like a pig at a slaughterhouse. Get out! Gromov kicked him out onto the porch and slammed the door, sliding the bolt back into place. The director was left alone on the porch, next to the guard's corpse and the bound secretary, who was moaning through his gag. Stepan! Stepanushka! The director shouted into the darkness, crawling on his knees. I'll give you everything. I'm not to blame. It was them. I just watched. There was no answer from the darkness, but a second later the director screamed differently. Something whistled through the air. A lasso, a common rope with a loop used to catch deer. The loop tightened around the director's neck. A jerk, and he was pulled off the porch into a snowdrift. He was dragged into the forest quickly, mercilessly. He plowed the snow with his face, grabbing at the crust with his hands. But the force at the other end of the rope was irresistible. His screams receded into the thicket, growing fainter until they turned into a gurgle and fell silent. It was quiet again in the house. Gromov was alone, he and the bound secretary on the floor, whom he had not bothered to drag back in. The colonel went to the buffet, took out a new bottle of vodka, broke off the neck on the edge of the table, and drank half of it in one gulp. Now it was a duel. 1-on-1. The beast of the taiga against the master of the zone. Gromov knew Stepan would not leave. He would come back for the main prize, and Stepan, at that time, was in the forest. He did not kill the director immediately? No. He hung him by his feet from a tall birch tree, upside down like a carcass to dry. Hang there, think, Stepan said, looking at the inverted red face. The blood will rush to your head. Maybe some smart thoughts will appear. About your soul, for example. The director rasped, swinging in the wind. He was alive, whole, but completely helpless. The frost would do its job by morning, and in the meantime, he would hang and listen to the wolves howling at the moon, waiting for easy prey. Stepan returned to the hunting lodge. The last act remained, the most difficult one. Gromov was not a naive merchant or a cowardly party official. He was a veteran, albeit a rear echelon one. He shot well, and he was cornered. Stepan knew he could not storm him head-on. Gromov was sitting opposite the door with his rifle, but Stepan had a plan. He remembered that there was a cellar under the house. The vent, a ventilation opening in the foundation, was narrow, but Stepan was wiry. And he also knew that the floor in the living room, although made of thick planks, had cracks. He crawled to the foundation. In his hands was a canister, but not with gasoline. In the garage, Stepan had found a barrel of carbide, the same stuff that gas welders use. If you throw carbide into water, it releases acetylene. The gas is explosive, but more importantly, it causes severe suffocation and a stinging sensation in the eyes, worse than tear gas. And it also knocks you unconscious. Stepan threw pieces of carbide into the cellar vent. Then, using a hose, he began to pour water from melted snow. The chemical reaction started instantly. Hissing, gurgling, acrid white gas began to rise, seeping through the cracks in the floor directly into the living room. Friends, do you think Stepan was right to leave the director hanging in the cold upside down? Or should he have finished him off so he wouldn't suffer? After all, is mercy to an enemy a strength or a weakness? Write in the comments, strength or weakness, because now Stepan will enter the house and there will be no place for mercy there. Inside the house, Gromov began to cough again, but it was not smoke. It was a sweetish, nauseating smell that made his eyes water and his legs buckle. Gas! He rasped, trying to stand up. You son of a bitch! He realized he was losing consciousness. He tried to break the window with the butt of his rifle, to let in some air, but his hands became like cotton. The carbine fell from his weakened fingers. The colonel sank to the floor, scratching the parquet with his nails. Consciousness was slipping away into a cloudy whiteness. Stepan waited 10 minutes, then put on a gas mask, which, ironically, was hanging on a nail in the same garage for civil defense purposes. He broke the window and stepped inside. Through the cloudy lenses of the gas mask, he saw Gromov. He was lying in the middle of the room, still breathing, but in a deep blackout. Stepan approached, kicked the carbine aside, and took off the gas mask. The gas was already clearing through the broken window. "Get up, Citizen Chief," Stepan said, quietly. "The court has arrived." He did not tie him up. Why? Gromov was now weaker than a child. Stepan slung the colonel's heavy body over his shoulder like a sack of flour and carried him. Not into the forest, not to the police. He carried him to where it all began, to the very shed where Christina had been held yesterday. Colonel Gromov's awakening was terrible. Worse than the most severe hangover, worse than the concussion he once got foolishly during exercises. His head was splitting, and a cloyingly sweet taste of acetylene mixed with bile filled his mouth. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids were stuck together with dried blood. When Stepan was dragging him, the colonel had hit his face on the door jamb a couple of times. Gromov tried to move his hand, metal clanked. He jerked, lunged with his whole body and howled. His hands were stretched out to the sides and handcuffed to thick wooden posts supporting the roof of the shed. The same handcuffs his warders used to chain up unruly convicts. His legs were also tied with a belt. He was hanging crucified, like a carcass in a slaughterhouse. In the very shed where Christina had been held just yesterday. It was cold. Steam came from his mouth, but Gromov was sweating from terror. Opposite him, sitting on an overturned crate of canned meat, was Stepan. The gamekeeper had already taken off his camouflage suit. Now he sat in a simple quilted jacket, calm, matter of fact. He was sharpening his huge hunting knife on a whetstone. Shik, 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 shik. This rhythmic sound hammered into Gromov's brain like nails. "Awake, master?" Stepan asked without raising his eyes from the blade. "How did you sleep?" "You!" Gromov rasped. His voice broke into a squeal. "Do you understand what you've done, you bastard? I'm a colonel in the MVD. They'll look for me. They'll send a division here. They'll skin you alive." Stepan stopped his hand with the knife, raised his eyes. They held such an icy void that Gromov choked on his own scream. "A division?" Stepan asked. "Maybe they will, but you won't see it. And look for you? You know, Yura, the taiga is big. People sometimes disappear here. A person was here, and then they're gone. A bear mauled them. They drowned in a swamp, or their conscience got the better of them, and they went to a hermitage to atone for their sins." Stepan stood up and came closer. He took Gromov by the chin with a hand in a rough leather glove and forced him to look into his eyes. "You liked it when they were afraid of you, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "You liked to watch the girls cry, how they begged." "I'll give you money," Gromov babbled, changing tactics. "Do you hear me, man? I have a stash. Gold, foreign currency. I'll buy you a Volga. I'll get your daughter into a Moscow institute without exams. Do you want it? Anything you want, just let me go." Stepan smirked. "To Moscow? My daughter will be screaming in her sleep for the rest of her life, and you're sending her to Moscow." With a sharp movement, Stepan tore the collar of the colonel's expensive shirt. The buttons scattered on the floor. On Gromov's hairy chest, a massive cross hung on a gold chain. "Well, well," Stepan was surprised. "A party card in your pocket and a cross on your neck. How do they get along, Yura? God and the devil? Or did you think the cross would save you from a bullet or absolve your sins?" Stepan ripped the cross off along with the chain and threw it into the mud at his feet. "You have no God, Chief. Your God is power, and your power ended here, in this shed. I am the power." Stepan returned to the crate, took a bottle of vodka from the table, which he had grabbed from the house, took a sip, then poured the rest on the blade of the knife. "Disinfection," he explained. "I'm not some beast to bring in dirt." Gromov trembled. He looked at the knife, gleaming in the light of the moon filtering through the cracks. What are you going to do?" he whispered. "Remember how they brand cattle in the villages?" Stepan asked. "So they don't get mixed up, so everyone knows. This bull is a fighter. This ram is mangy. You branded people, didn't you, Yura? You broke their fates, put stamps in their personal files. Now it's my turn." Stepan came very close. You like to work with your hands to feel, to hit, so we'll start with your hands. What happened next would have made even seasoned surgeons turn away. Stepan did not cut the veins. He acted like a professional hunter who knows anatomy. He took Gromov's right hand, the index finger, the one that pulled the trigger, and the one that poked subordinates in the face. "You don't need this finger anymore," Stepan said. With one precise, short movement, he cut the tendon. The finger hung limply, turning into a useless piece of flesh. Gromov howled, jerking in his shackles, but the steel held firm. "And this one," Stepan took the thumb, "so you can never hold a spoon or a pen or a human life again." A second cut. Gromov was no longer screaming. He was rasping, blowing bloody bubbles. It was painful, but the shock did not let him pass out. Methodically, finger by finger, Stepan deprived the colonel's hands of their function. He did not cut them off. He turned them into whips, claws. Now this man would not even be able to button his own pants. He became completely, absolutely helpless, dependent, just like the girls who were in his power. "There," Stepan wiped the knife on the colonel's trousers. "Now you're safe, almost." He stepped back, lit a cigarette. Gromov hung there, breathing heavily. Tears flowed down his face, mixing with snot and sweat. "Kill me," he whispered. "Be a man, finish me off." "You have to earn death," Stepan answered. "And you haven't earned an easy death. You will live Yura for a long time." Stepan left the shed and returned 5 minutes later. In his hands was a handful of something soft. It was women's clothing, the same nightgowns, torn dresses that were lying around in the house, the victim's belongings. He threw the pile at Gromov's feet. "Are they warm?" Stepan asked. "Do you smell them?" "The smell of fear." Then he did something Gromov did not expect at all. Stepan took the colonel's ID from his pocket. He had searched him earlier. A red booklet with the gold embossing MVD USSR, a symbol of inviolability. Stepan opened it, looked at the photo. A smug, well-fed face. "Handsome," he said. "Now watch." He brought the ID to Gromov's lips. "Eat it." "What?" The colonel did not understand. "Eat it, I said," Stepan roared, and a bear's growl cut through his voice. "You use this to cover yourself? You crushed people with it. Now let it feed you." He stuffed the cardboard document into the colonel's mouth. "Chew, swallow, so that your power is inside you, so that you choke on it." Gromov choked, coughed, tried to spit out the soggy cardboard, but under the gamekeeper's heavy gaze, he was forced to chew. It was a humiliation worse than pain. The symbol of his power was turning into a dirty mush in his mouth. Friends, many will say, "This is brutality. You can't do that to a person." But was Colonel Gromov a person at that moment? Or did he cease to be one when he ordered the beaten girl to be thrown into the cooler? Where is the line beyond which pity becomes a crime? Write in the comments, "Stepan is right," or "This is too much." When the meal was over, Stepan did one last thing. He unbuckled the belt tying Gromov's legs, but did not remove the handcuffs. "You're free," he said, "conditionally. The keys to the handcuffs are in the forest, in the pit where your guard froze. If you make it, you'll open them. If you don't, well, that's fate." He opened the shed door wide. Dawn was breaking outside, gray, cold, joyless. The frost had eased a little, but it was still around -20. "Go," Stepan said. "Run, Yura. Your secretary isn't running anymore. The director is also hanging, resting, and you have a chance? A small one. But you do." Gromov, staggering, fell out of the shed. His arms, hanging like whips, dragged through the snow. He could not feel them. He was covered in blood, in someone else's clothes, half mad from pain and terror. He saw the forest, the dark, silent forest that he had considered his domain. Now the forest looked at him with 1,000 eyes. Gromov took a step, then another. He fell into a snowdrift, tried to get up, leaning on his mutilated hands, howled in pain, and fell again. He crawled. He crawled like a worm. Where to? To the road? It was 40 kilometers away. To people? Who would help him? He crawled away from this cursed place. Stepan stood on the porch and watched him go. He did not shoot. He knew Gromov would not make it. With such hands, in such a state, in such cold. But even if they found him, who would he be? An invalid, a cripple, A man who had eaten his own ID and lost everything. Would he tell the truth? Who would believe him? They would say, delirium tremens. The colonel went mad, froze his hands off while drunk. End of his career, end of his life. It was worse than a bullet. It was oblivion. Stepan returned to the ravine where the girls were hiding. Christina was not asleep. She sat, hugging her knees, and trembled. Dad, she raised her head. Is it over? It's over, daughter. Stepan hugged her. He smelled of blood, smoke, and gunpowder. But for Christina, it was the best smell in the world. Get ready, we're leaving. And them? One of the girls asked, nodding towards the hunting lodge. They're gone, Stepan said firmly. And they were never here. Forget it. It was a bad dream. They left in single file. Stepan walked last. He was pulling a sled on which he had placed the two weakest girls. Before leaving, he did one more thing. He opened the valves on the gasoline cans in the garage, doused the house, doused the binya, and threw a match. The flames shot up instantly, greedily devouring the dry larch. Fire is the best cleaner. It will hide the tracks. It will destroy this den of debauchery. When the helicopter arrives, they will find only ashes and possibly a few charred bodies. An investigation. In such a remote place, they will write it off as an accident. A drinking party, a fire. They suffocated. A common occurrence. Stepan looked back one last time. A huge column of black smoke rose into the sky like a memorial candle. Somewhere out there, in the forest, the former master of life was crawling towards his fate, and Stepan was leading his small squad home. But the story does not end here, because a crime always has an echo. And what happened in the taiga reverberated in the high offices of Irkutsk and Moscow, because Colonel Gromov was not just the head of a zone. He was a link in a chain, and when the link fell out, the chain clanked. The journey back was more terrifying than the fight itself. The adrenaline that had driven Stepan forward had evaporated, replaced by a leaden fatigue. He was 52 years old, and in those 24 hours, he had lived through another war. They walked through the taiga slowly, like a funeral procession. Stepan pulled a homemade sledge on which lay Christina and another girl, completely exhausted, with a high fever. The others trudged behind, holding on to each other, wrapped in men's clothing taken from the dead guards. The frost did not let up. The taiga cracked, as if threatening, "You won't make it, I'll take you." But Stepan knew the forest. He knew where to take a shortcut along the frozen bed of a stream, where to shelter from the wind in a hollow. He made smokeless fires, boiled snow in a tin can, and gave the girls hot water with pine needles to drink, the only vitamin available here. "Hang in there, my dears," he would whisper when someone fell into a snowdrift and asked to be left to die. "Just a little further, it's warm there. There are people." But he spoke of people with caution. Stepan understood that returning to the village was only half the battle. The main thing was what would happen next. How to explain 5 half-dead girls. How to hide the smell of burning that had permeated his clothes. They reached the outskirts of the village of Tyrzhny in the dead of night on the second day. Stepan did not take them to his house. They might be waiting there. He took them to the only person he trusted more than himself, the Feldsheriff Ignat Kuzmich. Kuzmich was an old camp doctor who had served 10 years under Stalin. He had seen everything in his life: scurvy, logging, interrogations. Nothing could surprise him. When Stepan knocked on the window of the clinic with a prearranged signal, Kuzmich opened it immediately. He saw Stepan, black with soot, with sunken eyes. He saw the girls. He did not ask a single question. "Bring them in," he grumbled, letting them into the warmth. All night, Kuzmich treated their wounds, smeared their frostbite with goose fat, and injected them with some of his own penicillin reserves. Christina slept on a couch for the first time in a week without nightmares. In the morning, as Stepan sat on the porch smoking and watching the sunrise, Kuzmich came out to him. "I've written in the log, group frostbite, found in the forest by tourists. I didn't see any signs of beatings. I cannot confirm rape." Stepan looked up at him. "Thank you, Kuzmich." "Don't thank me," the old man spat. "Do you know what's going to start now? The smoke from the hunting lodge is probably visible from a satellite. They'll come here, and not our local policemen, but important investigators from Irkutsk or Moscow. Are you ready? I'm ready, Stepan answered. And the girls? The girls will keep quiet, Kuzmich said sternly. They want to live. I explained it to them. If they open their mouths, they'll be dragged through the courts, disgraced throughout the Union, and then you see, a random brick might fall on their heads. Gromov has friends left. Kuzmich was right. 2 days later, the village awoke to the roar of helicopters. Two Mi-8 helicopters, with red stars on their sides, flew low over the roofs and headed towards the Black Creek. And in the evening, a convoy entered the village. Police, Bobiks, black Volgas, a truck with soldiers of the internal troops. The area was cordoned off. A state of emergency was declared. The official version for the people, the capture of particularly dangerous escaped recidivists. But the locals knew. The convicts had nothing to do with it. The investigation team worked at the ashes of the hunting lodge for a week. What they found there made the young prosecutor's investigator, Viktor Lebedev, go gray. Among the charred logs, they found the remains of bodies. The examination established that they were the guards. But the most terrible thing was found in the forest. The body of the director of the artel, hanging upside down from a birch tree like a bat. He had frozen to death, but before that, he had gone mad with fear. The body of the second secretary of the district party committee, found on the road with a crushed chest. And most importantly, Colonel Gromov. He was found 3 kilometers from the hunting lodge. He was alive, if you could call it that. Gromov lay in a snowdrift, curled up in a ball. He was terribly frostbitten. His hands with the severed tendons had turned into black icicles. His tongue, with which he had tried to eat snow, was swollen and did not fit in his mouth. When he was loaded onto the helicopter, he was moaning. In his eyes, once insolent and domineering, now splashed a primal horror. He looked at the forest as if the trees could come alive and strike him again. The doctors in Irkutsk saved his life. But at what cost? Amputation of both hands? Amputation of the feet? Deep brain damage due to hypothermia. He was left a severely disabled person, unable to speak, write, or care for himself. A vegetable. The master of the taiga had turned into a piece of meat that had to be fed with a spoon. Stepan had kept his word. Death would have been a gift. And this was purgatory on earth. Interrogations began in the village. The investigator, Lebedev, was no fool. He was an important investigator, sent from Moscow to find out why the party and economic elite were killed in the taiga. He immediately understood. It was not bandits. Bandits would have taken the gold, weapons, cars, but here the cars were burned. The director of the artel's gold was found scattered in the snow. Stepan had not even touched it. This was revenge, cruel, professional, personal. Lebedev began to dig. Who could have done it? Who had a motive? He quickly came to the story of the gamekeeper's missing daughter. Kornilov, Stepan Andreevich, Lebedev read in the file. Born in 1917, a veteran. Reconnaissance, awards, wow. Order of Glory, experience in sabotage work. Lebedev summoned Stepan for questioning. Stepan came calm, clean-shaven, in his Sunday jacket with his metal ribbons. They sat in the office of the village council chairman, facing each other, the Moscow detective and the Taiga Wolf. Where were you from May 15th to 18th, Citizen Kornilov? Lebedev asked, drilling him with his gaze. In the forest, Stepan answered simply. I'm a gamekeeper. That's my job. I was conducting a census of the animals. Alone. Alone with my dog. And you didn't see anything? Smoke? Shots? The taiga is big, citizen investigator. The taiga is noisy. Maybe someone was shooting somewhere. There are a lot of poachers these days. Lebedev smirked. There at the hunting lodge, people were butchered like carcasses. Professionally, do you know who can do that? Someone who has been hunting animals his whole life, or a fascist. Lebedev stood up, walked around the office, and came up close to Stepan. I know it was you, Kornilov. I can feel it in my gut. Your daughter went missing, and then she suddenly turned up at the Felchers, mute as a fish. And the other girls are silent too. You have a conspiracy of silence. Stepan looked him in the eye. My daughter is at home. She's sick. She caught a cold. And why is she silent? What is there to talk about? About how she was... Stepan did not finish. The muscles on his jaw worked. You have to understand, Stepan. The investigator's voice became softer, almost human. I'm not Gromov. I'm the law. There are 5 corpses, 5. Vigilantism is a capital offense. Confess, you'll get a reduced sentence. Mitigating circumstances, combat merits. Maybe you'll get 15 years. Not the death penalty. Stepan was silent. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was not a policeman who entered the office. It was the old Feldshare Kuzmik, and behind him the chairman of the collective farm and the school director and the loggers. They came in a crowd, filling the small office. The men stood silently, crumpling their hats in their hands. What do you want? The investigator was confused. An interrogation is in progress. Get out. We won't leave, said the chairman of the collective farm, a sturdy man with the star of a hero of labor. We, comrade investigator, have come to give testimony. What testimony? Stepan Andreevich has an alibi, the chairman said firmly. All those days he was at the collective farm, helping to repair the roof of the cow shed. The whole crew saw him, from morning till night. I confirm, the school director nodded, and I saw him in the evening. We had tea. And I saw him too, the blacksmith boomed in a bass voice. Lebedev looked at them and could not believe his ears. It was a lie, a brazen, undisguised lie. They were all lying to the face of a representative of the authorities. But it was a great lie. The entire village stood up as one for one of their own. They knew what Gromov had done, and they knew what Stepan had done. To them, he was not a murderer. He was the sanitarian of the forest who had cleansed their land of filth. Do you understand that this is perjury? Lebedev asked quietly. I can put you all in prison. You can't imprison everyone, Chief, Kuzmich said. The taiga is big, and Stepan is one of ours. We won't give him up. Friends, this scene sends shivers down your spine. Imagine ordinary Soviet people, accustomed to fearing the authorities, suddenly straightening their shoulders and saying to the system, no. Not at a rally, but quietly, looking them in the eye. Because for a Russian person, justice has always been above the law. And would you be able, risking your freedom, to stand up for a neighbor, knowing that he had committed an act of vigilantism? Write yes or no. It's an honest question. The investigator Lebedev was an intelligent man, and somewhere deep down, a decent one. He looked at these people, at Stepan, who sat straight, not hiding behind others' backs, looked at the veterans' medal ribbons. Lebedev remembered how he himself, as a boy in 45, had met his father returning from the front, and he remembered the mutilated, moaning Gromov in the hospital. He understood, if he arrested Stepan, he would have to fight this entire nation, and the trial of Gromov, if he spoke, would expose such a boil of corruption that heads would roll in Moscow itself. Lebedev sighed and closed the case file. So, he was fixing the roof? He asked again. He was, the men answered in unison. He did a good job. It doesn't leak. For centuries, Stepan answered. Lebedev stood up. The case of the attack on the hunting lodge is closed due to the death of the suspects. The main version, a gang shootout between unidentified persons and the colonel's security. Apparently, they couldn't agree on something. Everyone died in the shootout and the fire. He approached Stepan. Take care of your daughter, gamekeeper, and your rifle. Hide it far away. Next time, the roof might leak. Lebedev left the next day. Moscow received a convenient version. Bandits had killed each other. Gromov was discharged due to a disability received in the line of duty. It was easier for the system to forget and bury this case in secret archives than to admit that one old man with a double-barreled shotgun had brought the local authorities to their knees. It would seem to be a happy ending, but life is not a movie. Stepan remained free. Christina remained alive, but happiness never knocked on their door again. Stepan changed. He became reclusive, almost stopped talking. The blood he had shed, even if it was the blood of enemies, weighed heavily on his soul. He often went into the taiga and sat there for days on the ashes of the hunting lodge looking at the black coals. And Christina never became a doctor. She could not go to the city. The sight of a bus caused her to have a panic attack. She stayed in the village, worked in the library, and never married. People said that at night the light was off and on in the Kornilov's house, and you could hear the daughter crying. and the father would pace from corner to corner, the floorboards creaking. Revenge was served, but it did not heal the wounds. It only cauterized them with a hot iron. But there was another ending. Many years later, in the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the archives were opened, an old journalist found a strange patient in a home for the disabled near Irkutsk. His chart listed him as unknown, without hands, without feet, mute. The staff called him Mumu. He had lived in the institution for 20 years, sitting by the window and looking at the forest. The nurses said that he was terrified of men with beards and the smell of pine needles. When the journalist showed him an old photograph of Stepan Kornilov, Mumu suddenly had a seizure, a hoarse howl escaped from his throat, and tears rolled from his eyes. It was Yuri Gromov. He lived in his personal hell every day, remembering that shed and that knife. Stepan Kornilov died in 1984, quietly in his sleep. The entire district came to his funeral. The coffin was carried for 6 kilometers to the cemetery. On his grave, they did not write "The Avenger." They simply wrote, Stepan Andreevich Kornilov, war veteran, gamekeeper.